Have you ever wondered how a group of colonies managed to defy one of the world's most powerful empires? It's a question that takes us back to the mid-18th century, a time when the British Empire had its eyes set on the prosperous 13 colonies across the Atlantic Ocean. Under the British rule, the American colonies were subjected to a series of taxes imposed by a distant parliament. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts. These were not just taxes on goods, but a direct assertion of British authority. The colonists, however, had a different perspective. They believed in the principle of no taxation without representation. They saw these acts as a violation of their rights as Englishmen, and this belief sparked the first stirrings of resistance. The unrest grew, and the colonists started expressing their dissatisfaction through protests. They boycotted British goods, held public demonstrations, and published pamphlets advocating for their rights. Among these acts of defiance, one event stands out: the Boston Tea Party. In December of 1773, a group of colonists disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded British ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into the Boston harbor. It was a bold act of protest against the Tea Act, a law that allowed the British East India Company to sell tea directly to the colonies, bypassing colonial merchants and undercutting their prices. The Boston Tea Party was a clear message to the British Empire. The colonists would not be passive subjects. The British responded with punitive measures, closing the Boston harbor and implementing the so-called Intolerable Acts. These actions only fueled the fire of revolution. In response, the colonies convened the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia in September of 1774. They discussed their grievances, declared their rights, and planned collective resistance against British rule. It was a significant move towards unity and self-governance. As resentment and unrest grew, the stage was set for a revolution that would change the course of history and give birth to a new nation, the United States of America. The year 1775 marked the beginning of a bloody and relentless conflict. It was the onset of the American War of Independence, a war that was to shape the destiny of a nation. The initial confrontations of this war were fierce and unforgiving. In the early morning of April 19th, the battles of Lexington and Concord broke out, marking the first military engagements of the American Revolutionary War. British troops had been sent to seize colonial military supplies, but they were met with resistance from the Minutemen, local colonial militia who were ready to fight at a minute's notice. In Lexington, the first shot rang out. No one knows who fired it, but it's known today as the shot heard round the world. It was a signal, a declaration, that the colonies were ready to stand their ground. By the end of the day, the British troops were retreating back to Boston, leaving behind a trail of blood and a newfound resolve in the American colonies. Following these initial confrontations, the siege of Boston began. The British Army found itself trapped in the city by the Continental Army, a newly formed force representing the 13 American colonies. This army was a symbol of unity and defiance, a tangible manifestation of the colonies' determination to resist British rule. The Continental Congress, recognizing the need for strong leadership, appointed George Washington as the commander of the Continental Army. Washington, a man of great integrity and courage, accepted the responsibility, and under his command, the Continental Army began to evolve into a formidable force. But the colonies were up against a professional army, the best in the world at the time. They were short on military experience and resources, and many doubted their ability to stand up to the might of the British Empire. Yet, they were driven by something stronger, a burning desire for freedom, a determination that was to shape the destiny of a nation. Despite their lack of military experience and resources, the colonies were determined to fight for their freedom. The War of Independence wasn't just a string of American victories. It was a seesaw of triumphs and setbacks, a testament to the resilience and resolve of a budding nation. The early years of the war saw the American forces tasting both the bitterness of defeat and the sweetness of victory. The Battle of Long Island, fought in August of 1776, was a harsh blow to the Continental Army. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, George Washington's forces faced a crushing defeat. The British Army, confident and well-equipped, seemed invincible. But the tides of war are unpredictable, and the Americans proved they were not to be underestimated. The Battle of Trenton, fought on a frigid Christmas night in 1776, was a much-needed morale boost for the Americans. Washington's daring crossing of the Delaware River and surprise attack on the Hessian forces in Trenton was a bold stroke that rekindled hope in the American cause. Yet, it was the Saratoga campaign in the autumn of 1777 that truly turned the tides. The British planned to cut off New England from the rest of the colonies, a strategy that could have spelled the end of the American Rebellion. But in a series of battles collectively known as the Battle of Saratoga, the Americans emerged victorious. The Saratoga campaign was a turning point not just because it was a major American victory, but also because it convinced France to join the war on the side of the Americans. France, still smarting from their defeat in the 7 Years' War and eager to undermine British power, saw an opportunity in the American struggle. The French alliance brought not just military support, but also financial aid and international legitimacy to the American cause. These ups and downs, victories and defeats, formed the patchwork of the War of Independence. Each battle, each campaign, was a thread woven into the fabric of a nation's birth. And with the support of France, the momentum of the war began to shift. The years 1781 to 1783 were a turning point in the War of Independence. As the war entered its final stages, a significant event solidified the path to American victory, the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. This was a decisive American triumph, where General George Washington, with the aid of French forces led by General Rochambeau, trapped British General Cornwallis and his troops on the Yorktown Peninsula in Virginia. The siege lasted for several weeks, and the British, unable to escape or receive reinforcements, were eventually forced to surrender. This defeat was a devastating blow to Britain, both militarily and morally, and it effectively marked the end of major combat operations in the War of Independence. But a war isn't won on the battlefield alone. In the wake of Yorktown, a subtle yet powerful weapon took center stage: diplomacy. The American negotiators, guided by the astute John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, entered into peace talks with Britain. Their goal? To secure not only an end to the war, but also the recognition of American independence. The negotiations were held in Paris, and they were far from straightforward. The Americans and the British had to navigate a complex web of international relationships, as France, Spain, and the Netherlands were also involved in the peace process. Each nation had its own interests and objectives, and the Americans had to skillfully balance these against their own goals. After months of diplomatic maneuvering, the Americans and the British finally reached an agreement. The Treaty of Paris, signed on September 3, 1783, officially ended the War of Independence. This historic document recognized the United States of America as a sovereign nation, free from British rule, and set the boundaries of the new nation. The Treaty of Paris marked the end of the war and the birth of a new nation. The United States of America, born out of a struggle for liberty and self-governance, had emerged victorious. The final years of the War of Independence were not just about military might, but also about the power of diplomacy and the enduring desire for freedom. The War of Independence was more than just a military conflict. It was a clash of ideas, a struggle for justice, and a quest for freedom that would forever shape the course of human history. This war wasn't just about territory or resources. It was about the right to self-governance, the freedom to choose one's destiny, and the courage to stand against tyranny. It was a war that challenged the established norms of power and dominance. It was a war that questioned the divine right of kings and proposed a radical new idea: that all men are created equal, endowed with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The War of Independence was a crucible that forged a new nation. It was a catalyst that sparked the flame of democracy, igniting a beacon of hope that would illuminate the path for countless nations seeking their own freedom. It was a war that redefined the very essence of nationhood, making it not about the land one rules, but about the ideals one upholds. This war was the birthplace of the United States, a nation built on the principles of liberty, equality, and justice. It was the crucible that tested and ultimately affirmed the resilience of these principles. It was a war that demonstrated that these principles were not just lofty ideals, but practical guidelines that could form the foundation of a thriving society. But more than anything else, the War of Independence was a testament to the power of the human spirit. It was a demonstration of the indomitable will of a people united by a shared vision, a shared purpose, and a shared dream. It was a war that showed that when people come together, when they stand as one, they can overcome even the mightiest of oppressors. The War of Independence was a testament to the power of a united people fighting for their freedom. It was a war that showed the world that freedom is not a privilege bestowed by the powerful, but a right inherent to all people. And it was a war that reminded us that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and that the struggle for liberty is a battle that must be fought in every generation.